92% of workplace apps will have AI integration by 2025, and Anthropic just made that timeline irrelevant.
Irrelevant? Are you saying Claude is already in our workplace tools? So we're covering which apps have it, how the integration actually works, and what data it can access?
By minute 4, you'll know exactly what Claude can see and do in your workspace. Let's get into it.
Welcome to the AI Daily Podcast. Today's news and a deep dive to help you stay ahead in AI.
Today, we're diving into Anthropic launches interactive Claude apps, including Slack and other workplace tools.
Stick around to the end for this week's headlines. Let's dive right in.
So, Anthropic just made a really interesting move. They're launching Claude apps directly integrated into workplace tools like Slack. And this feels like a significant shift in how AI companies are thinking about distribution.
Right, because up until now, Claude has mostly been this standalone chatbot interface, similar to ChatGPT. What's driving this change?
Well, think about it. We've been watching this AI arms race play out for almost 2 years now since ChatGPT launched. But here's what's fascinating. The battleground is shifting from who has the best model to who can embed their AI most seamlessly into where people actually work.
That makes sense. I mean, how many times do you actually go to Claude.ai or chat.openai.com versus just using AI where you're already working?
Exactly. And that's why the Slack integration is so strategic. Slack has what? 32 million daily active users? That's 32 million people who could potentially interact with Claude without ever leaving their primary communication platform.
But hasn't OpenAI already done this with their plugins ecosystem? They launched that back in May 2023.
They did, but here's the key difference. OpenAI's approach was more about letting third-party apps come to ChatGPT. Anthropic is doing the reverse. They're bringing Claude directly to where the work happens. It's a subtle but important distinction in strategy.
Is it really that different, though? Microsoft's been embedding OpenAI tech into Office apps with Copilot since September 2023.
You're right to bring up Microsoft. They've definitely been the most aggressive about workplace integration. But Anthropic's approach is interesting because they're not tied to a single ecosystem. They're going after multiple platforms simultaneously. Slack, Canva, Figma. It's more of a platform-agnostic strategy.
But doesn't that create fragmentation? Like if I'm using Claude in Slack and my designer is using it in Figma, are we getting consistent experiences?
That's actually one of the big questions here. When you distribute your AI across multiple platforms, you're essentially ceding some control over the user experience to those platforms. Each integration might work slightly differently, have different capabilities.
And from a technical perspective, how does this even work? Are they running the same Claude model across all these platforms?
Based on what we know about API-based integrations, they're likely using the same underlying models, but with platform-specific implementations. The interesting part is how they handle context and memory across these different environments.
Oh, that's a great point. If I'm chatting with Claude in Slack about a project, does it remember that conversation when I switch to using it in Canva?
And that brings us to one of the biggest challenges in workplace AI. Context persistence. It's not just about having AI in your tools. It's about having AI that understands your work context across tools.
This also raises some interesting questions about data privacy and security, especially in enterprise environments.
Absolutely. When you're integrating AI into Slack, you're potentially giving it access to incredibly sensitive business communications. How does Anthropic handle that? What are the data retention policies?
And from an IT admin perspective, how much control do companies have over these integrations? Can they set boundaries on what Claude can access?
These are exactly the kinds of questions that will determine whether this strategy succeeds. Because remember, Anthropic has always positioned itself as the safer AI company. That's been their differentiator since day one.
Right, but how do you maintain that safety-first approach when you're integrating into platforms you don't control?
Coming up, we'll dig into exactly how Anthropic is trying to balance this aggressive expansion with their safety principles, and what their technical implementation actually looks like under the hood. So let's talk about what's actually happening technically when Claude gets integrated into something like Slack.
Based on similar implementations we've seen, this is likely using OAuth 2.0 for authentication and webhook-based event handling.
Walk me through how that would work in practice. I'm in Slack, I want to invoke Claude. What's happening behind the scenes?
Typically, you'd have a slash command, something like /Claude, that triggers a webhook to Anthropic servers. The message content gets sent over HTTPS, processed by Claude's API, and the response comes back to Slack. The whole round trip usually takes 2 to 5 seconds, depending on the query complexity.
But that's sending potentially sensitive company data to Anthropic servers. How are they handling that from a security standpoint?
This is where it gets interesting. Anthropic claims they don't train on user data from these API calls, and they've implemented what they call ephemeral processing, meaning they don't store the conversation data after generating a response. But here's the thing. That's a trust relationship. There's no technical way for companies to verify this is actually happening.
That's a huge ask for enterprises. I mean, we're talking about potentially exposing internal communications, strategic discussions, maybe even code snippets if developers are using it.
Exactly. And this is why I think we're seeing Anthropic launch with consumer-friendly platforms first. Slack, Canva, Figma. These are tools where the sensitivity bar might be lower than, say, integrating directly into a company's internal code base or financial systems.
What about the actual capabilities? Is Claude in Slack as powerful as Claude of Web?
From what we can tell, they're using the same Claude 3 model family, but the implementation differs. In Slack, you're dealing with message length limits. Slack has a 40,000 character limit per message, but most implementations cap AI responses much lower, around 4,000 characters for readability.
That's interesting because one of Claude's strengths has been handling long context windows, up to 100,000 tokens. You lose that advantage in a platform like Slack.
But here's what's clever. They're not trying to replicate the full Claude experience. They're adapting to each platform's strengths. In Slack, it's about quick answers, summaries, and brief analysis. In Canva, it might be about creative brainstorming. In Figma, it could be design critique.
How does this compare to what OpenAI is doing with ChatGPT Enterprise? They've been pretty aggressive in the enterprise space, too.
OpenAI's approach has been more monolithic. They want you to come to ChatGPT as your central AI hub. They've got 92% of the Fortune 500 using ChatGPT in some capacity. But Anthropic is betting that users don't want another tab open. They want AI where they already are.
The numbers are interesting here. OpenAI claims ChatGPT has over 200 million weekly active users. Anthropic hasn't released Claude usage numbers, but industry estimates put them at maybe 10 to 20% of that. This platform integration strategy could be their way of closing that gap.
But there's a risk too. When you're integrated into someone else's platform, you're subject to their rules, their rate limits, their pricing models. Slack could decide tomorrow to prioritize their own AI features or partner exclusively with someone else.
Speaking of Slack's own AI, they announced Slack AI back in January 2024. How does Claude integration coexist with that?
That's the multi-billion-dollar question. Right now, Slack AI is focused on search, summarization, and channel insights. Pretty basic stuff. Claude brings more advanced reasoning and generation capabilities. But long-term, there's definitely potential for conflict.
And what about performance? Adding AI to these tools could slow them down, especially if every message is getting processed.
Performance is definitely a concern. Most implementations use asynchronous processing. The AI response doesn't block the main app functionality, but you're still adding latency. In our testing of similar integrations, we've seen anywhere from 500 milliseconds to 5 seconds of additional wait time.
That's significant in a real-time communication tool like Slack.
It is, and it's why the UX design of these integrations matters so much. You need clear loading states, the ability to cancel requests, maybe even predictive caching for common queries. The technical implementation is only half the battle. The user experience design is just as critical.
And this also raises questions about cost. Who's paying for all these API calls?
Stick around. In our final segment, we'll break down the economics of this approach and what it means for both companies and individual users who want to leverage these AI integrations. So let's talk about what this actually means for teams considering these AI integrations. First,
The economics. Claude's API pricing is roughly $3 per million input tokens and $15 per million output tokens. For context, that's about $0.01 to $0.02 for typical Slack conversation with Claude.
That doesn't sound like much, but it adds up quickly if you have a large team using it regularly.
Exactly. A 100-person team using Claude moderately, say 20 queries per person per day, could be looking at $500 to $1,000 per month just in API costs. And that's before any markup from the platform provider.
So what should teams be thinking about before jumping into these integrations?
First, establish clear use case boundaries. The teams we've seen succeed with AI integrations start with specific, high-value use cases, rather than just enabling it everywhere. Maybe it's using Claude for daily stand-up summaries in Slack or design feedback in Figma, but not for everything.
That makes sense. What about from a security perspective?
This is critical. You need to audit what data these integrations can access. In Slack's case, can Claude read all channels or just ones it's invited to? Can it access private messages, file uploads? Most platforms allow granular permissions, but you need to configure them properly.
Any specific recommendations there?
Start with read-only access in non-sensitive channels. Create a dedicated channel for AI interactions so you can monitor usage. And absolutely implement data classification. Make sure your team knows what can and can't be shared with AI tools.
What about measuring ROI? How do you know if these integrations are actually helping?
Great question. The teams seeing real value are tracking specific metrics: time saved on routine tasks, quality of AI-generated content, user adoption rates. One team I talked to found that Claude in Slack reduced their meeting summary time by 75%. That's measurable value.
Looking forward, where do you see this going?
I think we're heading toward a world where AI becomes invisible infrastructure. Just like we don't think about TCP/IP when we browse the web, we won't think about which AI model is powering our tools. It'll just be there, making everything a bit smarter.
But doesn't that create vendor lock-in concerns if Claude becomes deeply integrated into your workflows?
Absolutely. That's why I recommend teams maintain some level of AI abstraction. Use tools that allow model switching, keep your prompts and workflows portable. Don't build processes that only work with one specific AI provider.
Any predictions on how this competitive landscape evolves?
I think we'll see consolidation. Right now, we have OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, and others all trying to be the AI layer for every platform. That's not sustainable. My bet is we'll see platforms choosing exclusive partners within 18 months. Slack might go all in with one provider, Microsoft's already tied to OpenAI, Google will push Gemini in their ecosystem.
That could fragment the user experience even more.
It could, but it might also lead to deeper, more thoughtful integrations. Right now, a lot of these AI features feel bolted on. When platforms commit to a single AI partner, they can build more native experiences.
So what's your key takeaway for our listeners?
Here's what I'd say. These AI integrations are powerful, but they're tools, not magic. Start small, measure impact, and maintain healthy skepticism. The best implementations I've seen treat AI as an enhancement to human work, not a replacement for human judgment.
And from a technical perspective?
Pay attention to the integration patterns emerging now. They'll define how we build AI-powered applications for the next decade, whether it's OAuth flows, webhook patterns, or context management across platforms. These early implementations are setting standards.
Any final thoughts on Anthropic's strategy specifically?
They're making a smart bet that distribution matters more than pure model performance. Claude might not benchmark quite as high as GPT-4 on some tasks, but if it's the AI that's already in your Slack workspace, that's the one you'll use. It's the classic good enough and convenient beats perfect but inconvenient play.
And sometimes that's exactly what wins in tech.
Indeed. The AI that wins won't necessarily be the smartest, it'll be the one that fits most seamlessly into how we already work. And that's a lesson that goes way beyond just AI. Before we wrap up, let's catch up on this week's infrastructure news. There's a fascinating new development from Hugging Face about training GPT-OSS models with agentic reinforcement learning. They've published a detailed retrospective on the practical challenges they faced.
Agentic RL training? That sounds like they're pushing the boundaries of how these models learn and adapt.
Exactly. The blog post dives deep into debugging PPO on-policy training and the real-world obstacles they encountered. It's refreshing to see such transparency about what actually goes wrong when implementing these advanced techniques.
Speaking of practical implementation challenges, Martin Fowler's site has an interesting piece about code quality when using AI coding agents. Eric Dorenberg, who maintains CC Menu, actually used a coding agent to add a feature and then analyze the results.
And what did he find? I'm always skeptical about the internal quality of AI-generated code.
That's the fascinating part. He provides a detailed assessment of how these agents affect code maintainability and structure. It's not just about whether the code works, but whether it's actually good code that humans can work with later.
Now here's a major workplace AI development. Anthropic is embedding Slack, Figma, and Asana directly inside Claude. VentureBeat reports this essentially turns Claude into a workplace command center.
That's a game changer for productivity. Instead of switching between apps, you can interact with all your tools through natural conversation with Claude.
It really shows how AI assistants are evolving from simple chatbots to integrated workplace platforms. Though I wonder about the data privacy implications of having one AI system access all these different tools.
Speaking of concerning developments, The Verge reports that X is facing an EU investigation over Grok generating sexualized deepfakes.
The European Commission is specifically investigating whether X properly assessed and mitigated the risks before deploying Grok. This is exactly the kind of issue regulators have been warning about with generative AI.
It highlights the ongoing tension between rapid AI deployment and responsible development. Companies need to think through these potential misuse cases before launch, not after.
That wraps up this week's news. That's our show for today.
If you found this valuable, please subscribe and share with a friend who'd appreciate it.
Drop us a comment with your thoughts on today's topic.
Links to everything we discussed are in the show notes.
Until next time.